Give us free. Give us free.
Your Honor, please instruct the defendant that he cannot disrupt these proceedings with such outbursts.
Give us free. Give us free.
If we are to have any semblance of order in this country,
Give us
Village Podcast. Take it. Give it to us, we gon' Village Podcast. Give it to us, we gon'
Peace, unity, and welcome my conscious and unconscious family and friends. This is the all-new BlackVillage Community Podcast, and I am truly your host of the show, JC, aka Afro Black, dropping nothing but the raw and uncut, without any fear, as I use my mic as a spear to chucker you with liberated truth. I am your host and your native soldier in the struggle. My purpose and mission for this show is first to enlighten, inform, and engage. And I want to engage with all who claim to know the truth. All truth seekers and my native family, I welcome you. This show is dedicated to all our indigenous native ancestors and to all those who've carried the mantle of truth, and to every person with the ability to throw off the chains of comfortable habit and unwarranted assumption and move in a new, liberated direction that is guided by truth and observational evidence, no matter where that direction may lead you. My main objective and purpose here is freedom, mind, soul, and spirit. That being said, welcome to the BlackVillage Community Podcast, and much love from our great universal goddess and mother of all, living here and above.
AC in the house.
Aborigines, which means what? Black folks. You never find a white Aborigine. Rather, Aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are Aborigines, but you don't like to be called an Aborigine. You want to be called an American.
You go to a reservation, you see poverty, you see churches, and you see liquor stores. When you go to any hood, you see poverty, you see churches, and you see liquor stores. So what make you think you're not on a reservation? Right? So all these achievements that we ascribe to African Americans, these are achievements by Native Americans who had to take on the identity of being African American because they was hanging us.
This means, in the case of an American Negro, it comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you, that the Indians were you. That the Indians were you. That the Indians were you.
But you think they was hanging people because they was Africans. Africans just want to go home. Nigga from here want to take his shit over. But you think they was hanging people because they was Africans. Africans just want to go home. Nigga from here want to take his shit over, want to take his shit over.
Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. The rock was landed on us. The rock was landed on us. The rock was landed on us.
Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people.
Aboriginal means the original inhabitant of a land from the earliest times. The ancient mound builders that built and designed the pyramids right here, not just by the Nile, contrary to popular belief in denial. Pyramids and huge hieroglyphics and pictographs on the ground are all mounds found around the Americas, North, Central, and South. even Venus and Mars. That is documented fact that emanates from my mouth. So who exactly were these Aboriginals here? Whose ancient evidence of residency is hesitantly mentioned in this hemisphere? Were they the stereotypical Native American so-called Red Indians? Well then, let's be clear. Ask India, their tribe built their sincere. They'll tell ya, those mounds predate the origins. Our past was erased and replaced with lies. Our achievements and identity plagiarized. We got amnesia of who we are, but we go way back further than the seats in your car.
Aboriginal people, 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 Aboriginal people.
This is how we ride and roll. Soldier for life for sure.
Hey, people. This is JC, aka Afro Black, and I am here with ya for another indigenous, delicious Sunday to drop nothing but the raw and uncut. That's what we do here on the Black Village. I drop nothing but the raw and uncut. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with it. Doesn't mean you're going to like it. And when it comes to truth, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't give a damn if you don't like it. Truth is truth. You feel me? That's what I do. That's what I reverberate on. That's what I do. That's what I share. And that's what I want to digest. I want to digest truth. You feel me? Not somebody's interpretation of facts, not somebody's opinion of an ideology. I want the raw and uncut. Do you feel me? And that's what we do here on the Black Village. Today's podcast is a continuation of last week's podcast and the week before then and the week before then, which is, this is part 4, people. Culture Vultures, part 4. The founders and agents of Pan-African propaganda. I know last week I said Pan-Africanism, but actually the podcast topic title is The Founders and the Agents of Pan-African Propaganda. Do you feel me? And I said, I know you heard me last week going back and forth talking about part 2 and part 4, but this is part 4 of Culture Vultures. This is part 2 of the founders and agents of Pan-African propaganda. Okay. Before, in the beginning, the first part of 3 weeks ago when I started this podcast topic, I told you, I proved to you, I was going to show you that Europeans are the founders of Pan-Africanism, at least here in America. I'm not talking about what went on in Africa with the Africans. I'm talking about what they started here in America, the confusion that and the delusion and all the vacuums of delusion that fold in on itself with religion, politics, and all the other ideologies that these devils create to create conspiracy and confusion with no real foundation, so everybody's confused about the truth. You feel me? And so I'm here to detangle, to translate and transliterate. You feel me? And that's what I do here at the Black Village as JC, aka Afro Black. You feel me? And you can chime in. Let me change my music right quick. Let me give you something easier to chime to. You feel me? Here we go, right here. Something a little bit more easy to chime to. There we go. Some J-Bach in the backdrop, you feel me? So I'm going to keep that back there for me to reverberate on. Give us something a little bit more laid back to reverberate to, you feel me? So let me keep this going. As I said, this is part 4 of Culture Vultures, part 4. Subtitle, The Founders and Agents of Pan-Africanism. Last week I shared information with the conscious community proving that the agents, now, the first 2 parts of my podcast, I explained and broke down the founders of this ideology, the founders of this propaganda, which are Europeans, which are white people, along with their agents, their porch monkeys, they're the ones they send out to be there, to do their beckoning and calling, the lick booters, the bootlickers, you feel me? Robert Delaney, you feel me? Let me continue on with these, Robert Delaney, one of the porch monkey founders, you feel me? Negro / Christian / he was born here in America, but, he want to attach himself to a new identity. You feel me? Alexander Cromwell. You feel me? Another porch monkey Negro. Edward Wilmot Blyton, another porch monkey Negro. The list goes on, but I was just talking about, at least 3 of the major forerunners of this ideology and false role reversing culture vulture mess. You feel me? But going down to their European daddies, to their European masters who help educate these Negroes so that they can do what they were doing and so that they can continue the confusion and delusion on those who are actually indigenous to America. Charles Robert Darwin. Now, I want you to know all these people I'm mentioning had their height of what they were doing, propagating, promoting in the 1800s. Charles Robert Darwin. Okay, everybody know who he is. I spoke about him. Thomas Henry Yulee. Everybody know who he is. He was a forerunner for Charles Darwin. They called him the Bulldog. He was known as the Bulldog for Darwin. He helped promote the evolutionary theories of Charles Darwin. Then we got Paul Broca, a.k.a. Paul Broca. His name was Pierre Paul Broca. Okay, and we got Sir Francis Galton. Okay, these guys helped put the foundation together for what became, what grew, and what helped promote this Pan-African ideology. The platform and the birth of the Out of Africa theory came out of these so-called European whatever you want to call these white devils. You feel me? I call them what they are, white devils, because they didn't care about truth, so they were creating a delusion of truth to help keep the indigenous people in a state of delusion and amnesia. You feel me? And so that's what I did. I explained that in the first part of Culture Vultures, and in Culture Vultures Part 2. And when I got to Part 3, where we did last week, which is focusing on the agents, which is the Negro sellouts. You feel me? And that's Part 4, which is today, is a continuation of exposing the agents, exposing the porch monkeys, Negroes who don't care about truth, Negroes who allow themselves to be used by white devils. This is going on today just like it was going on yesterday, people. Things ain't changed. Negroes, the spirit of the house Negro, the very house Negro that Brother Malcolm talked about, may he rest in peace, these Negroes are still here. That spirit, the white devil cultivated and created, the house Negro spirit. If you go back and focus and really detail and break down the Willie Lynch indoctrination, the whole point was to create a twofold Negro. One was the house Negro that the white devil could trust. The other is a broken Negro. Maybe this broken Negro will never be used by the white devil, but he's broken and he sees no way out of his situation. And that's what these Robinson Delaney, Alexander Cromwell, and not only that, I want you to know these are not the only Negroes. And now I told you also last week, I want to talk about the core of the abolitionist movement, the core of the American colonization society. What is the core philosophical ideologies of these so-called organizations that were supposed to be meant for the purpose of freeing so-called black people from slavery during this period of time? If you leave it up to the educational system here in America, the abolitionist movement was a cause and a rallying cry and a Superman, so to speak, for the so-called black community. That's what they want us to believe, that the abolitionists. But you don't see the school system. You don't see even a white America lifting up the abolitionist movement, making the abolitionists heroes. Why don't they do that? You know what they do? They want to focus on certain individuals within the movement and blow them up, to give you a misappropriated ideology, a misappropriated foresight of these people. Prime example, Harriet Tubman, who they label an abolitionist because of what she did with the Underground Railroad and freeing black people to Canada. Frederick Douglass is another one who they always want to promote, and he was a self-proclaimed abolitionist. I've never read anything with Harriet Tubman self-proclaimed herself as an abolitionist. I think more or less the system and white devils label her that, to give the abolitionist a so-called melanated face. You feel me? But I'm finna give you the truth about the abolitionist movement. I'm going to give you the raw and uncut about the abolitionist movement today here on the Black Village. So before I go into the philosophical core of what the abolitionist movement was about, were they a movement? Were they literally an organization? Or were they just people who took on this idea that they labeled abolitionist? I say people, white people, confused, sold out house Negroes who wanted to set themselves politically apart from the political establishment in this country during the foundation and formation of the white devil's Democratic Republic. Let's get down to the root of this situation. Before I do that, before I go into the philosophical core and philosophy of the abolitionists and so-called American Colonization Society, let me establish some facts again. Let me establish some things again, okay? Number one, again, our people need to comprehend and need to understand that the term genocide does not mean physical death. Genocide literally means the destruction of a cultural society. It means the assimilation and destruction of a cultural indigenous people from one state to another. Okay? And the reason why I'm doing this is because the purpose of understanding what was the agenda of the abolitionist movement, what was the real agenda of the American Colonization Society. And I'm going to tell you what their real agenda was. Cultural genocide. I've said it before. I will continue to say this, and people need to embrace this and see this for the truth of what it is. The real agenda of the abolitionist movement. Because even though the abolitionist movement wanted so-called black people free from slavery, the question is, what was the next step after freedom from slavery? And it's also, you got to also remember, people, and bear in mind, slavery was not all over this country. It was not in every so-called colonized state. You had states that did not have slave laws. You had states where slavery was illegal. Most of your slavery was legal. Most of the slave laws were in the South. Not only in the South, but I said mostly in the South. And this is the reason why you had slave hunters that will go outside the South, grab free black people, take them to the South, because once you were in the South, because your skin was melanated, now you're stuck in a system because you're in that system in the territory where that system exists. This is why it was important, and this is the reason why Harriet Tubman worked so hard to free Negroes literally from the South. Not only from the South, because she stopped and dropped off so-called black people in many places in the North and in the East as she was going. She didn't just drop black folks off in Canada. So, back to my point, people. So, we have to first understand and realize what was the purpose of cultural assimilation. The purpose and the main agenda of cultural assimilation was cultural genocide. To make our people, when these white folks came here, settled here in the 15th, 16th century, when they first got here, lying to our people as if they were coming in peace. They want those people that they saw. They want those melanated indigenous people to go away. That was the whole purpose of cultural genocide. That was the whole purpose of cultural assimilation, to make those people go away. Now, once a lot of so-called black people assimilated, became educated, like people like Alexander Cromwell, like Martin Delaney, once they became educated, that wasn't enough for some of these white devils. They still literally wanted the people, the indigenous Aboriginal people, to literally dissipate, to disappear, to leave now the lands of their forefathers, the lands of their mothers, the lands of their ancestors, the land of their birth. They wanted them to leave. And that's what the split of the abolitionist movement, which split into the American Colonization Society and other organizations that are not mentioned right now, that's what it was all about. Because the abolitionist movement was made up of many different people with different ideologies. All of them agreed to free so-called black people who were actually already free, even by legislative constitutional amendment, the 13th and the 14th Amendment, meaning the 13th was before the 14th. And in the 13th constitutional amendment, it says slavery is outlawed. But did the other states agree and follow suit with that? No, they were making their own laws in each state. Texas had their own laws. Alabama had their own laws. These white devils were creating their own laws, and the purpose of these laws was to restrict, was to control, and to enslave, and to assimilate indigenous people. So let me go on down to some information, people. Let me go on down to some information. I also said that I was going to, I wanted to read an article, and this article that I want to read is titled "The Attitude of the Free Negro Towards African Colonization." This article was put out in 1916. Mind you, the information within the article is older than 1916, but it was published in 1916. But the article itself is much older than 1916. This article, let me go on down. This article goes all the way to talking about incidents and what was going on in 1817. So it's called "The Attitude of the Free Negroes Towards African Colonization." So I want to read that as well. But before I go into reading any information to support the podcast topic at hand, again, let me break down genocide. Okay, cultural genocide. Okay, cultural genocide of indigenous peoples is the mass destruction of entire communities. I'm reading you the definition of genocide in reference to cultural genocide. Okay, the genocide of indigenous people is the mass destruction of entire communities of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are understood to be people whose historical and current territory has become occupied by colonial expansion, or the formation of a state by a dominant group such as colonial power. While the concept of genocide was formulated by Raphael Lemkin in the mid-20th century, the earlier expansion of various European colonial powers such as the Spanish and British empires and the subsequent establishment of colonies on indigenous territories frequently involved acts of genocidal violence against indigenous groups in the Americas, Australias, Africas, and Asia. There you go. Now, that's understood, okay? That's understood. Now, mind you, okay, genocide is a twofold or a double sword. One is the total assimilation of a people. The other is physical altercations. So most people, when they hear genocide, they think somebody's been killed. But that's not necessarily what genocide means. Genocide has a double or a twofold meaning. Let me read that. According to Lemkin, colonization was in itself instinctively genocidal. Okay, basically when a people come in and take over your people, he said that was genocide in itself. Okay, according to Raphael Lemkin, I'm reading from the definition written that was coined and by the person who actually coined the term, Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide. According to Lemkin, colonization was in itself intrinsically genocidal. He saw this genocide as a two-stage process. The first being the destruction of the indigenous population way of life. That's what's happened. That was the first stage right there. Did you hear it? He saw the genocide as a two-stage process. The first being the destruction of the indigenous population's way of life. That has happened, people. That's why the majority and the average so-called Black American have no knowledge of their indigenous culture, of their indigenous language, of their indigenous heritage, of their indigenous customs. Okay? These white devils know what the hell they've done. They know what they did, okay? Again, okay? He saw the genocide as a two-stage process. The first being the destruction of the indigenous people's indigenous population's way of life. In the second stage, the newcomers imposed their way of life on the indigenous group. According to David Marbury Lewis, imperial and colonial forms of genocide are enacted in two main ways. Either through the deliberate clearing of territories of their original inhabitants in order to make them exploitable for purposes of resources extraction or colonial settlements, or through enlisting indigenous peoples as forced laborers in colonial or imperialistic projects of resource extractions and designation of specific events as genocidal is often controversial. But did you hear that? What you just heard has happened, has already happened, did happen, and did start here in the Americas. North America and South America and all the little American islands, as I might just explain. Genocide. That is genocide. That is cultural genocide that I just read to you. So, be that stated, let me continue on with the program. So I want to establish that first before I go any further with this now. Now I'm going to go into the core of the philosophy, okay? Basically, the philosophy of the abolitionist movement. I want to read some information here that I got. It's called, this is, now you can go find this yourself. This is on www.thoughtco.com. This is called The Philosophies of the Abolitionist Movement. Okay, I'm going to read this. This is important to know. The reason why it's important to know, because still here in America, the school system want to say positive things about those who are abolitionists. Whenever you see a so-called slave documentary that comes on television, doesn't matter if it's Roots, 12 Years a Slave, doesn't matter what slave movie it is, they always want to try to make the abolitionists look like there's some good people. I'm here to tell you the abolitionists were just people who hid their true agendas. Abolitionists, not all abolitionists were true to the core of what abolitionists were supposed to be about. So let me read this right quick. And down as I read this. Okay, and it starts off. The first part. It says, as the enslavement of African Americans, of course it's going to say that, okay, became a preferred aspect of the United States society, people began questioning the morality of bondage. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the abolitionist movement grew, first through religious teachings of Quakers and later through anti-slavery organizations. Did you hear it? A large membership of the so-called abolitionist movement and even a large membership of the American Colonization Society were made up of Christians, ministers, and so-called church leaders. That's number one, but not all of them. There was a lot of political people who are also attached to these groups of people. Okay, historian Herbert Abathaker argues that there are three major philosophies of the abolitionist movement: moral secession followed by political action, and finally resistance through physical action. Let me read it again. Historian Herbert Abathaker argues that there are three major philosophies of the abolitionist movement: moral secession, that's the first one. Second one is moral secession followed by political action. And then the third one, finally, resistance through physical action. While abolitionists such as William Lloyd Garrison were lifelong believers in moral secession, others such as Frederick Douglass shifted their thinking to include all three philosophies. Meaning that Frederick Douglass also believed that you could fight back and fight for your freedom. Why wouldn't he? he fought for his. If you know anything about the biography of Frederick Douglass, he knocked out his slave master before he left. All right. Now let me read the 3 different philosophies, which is the core of the abolitionist movement, aka also the American Colonization Society. Moral secession. Many abolitionists believed in the pacifist approach to ending slavery. Abolitionists such as William Wells Brown and William Lloyd Garrison believed that people would be willing to change their acceptance of slavery if they could see the morality of enslaved people. To the end, abolitionists believing in moral secession published slave narratives such as Harriet Jacobs' Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl, and the newspapers such as the North Star and the Liberator. Speakers such as Maria Stewart spoke on lecture circuits to groups throughout the North and Europe to throng of peoples, trying to persuade them to understand the horrors of slavery. This is what moral secession teaches. Now, the second one, moral secession and political action. Towards the end of the 1830s, many abolitionists were moving away from the philosophy of moral secession. Throughout the 1840s, local, state, and national meetings of the National Negro Convention centered around the burning question. So-called African Americans used both moral secession and the political system to bring an end to slavery. At the same time, the Liberty Party was building steam. The Liberty Party was established in 1839 by a group of abolitionists that wanted to pursue emancipation of enslaved people via the political process. Although the political party was not popular among voters, the purpose of the Liberty Party was to underscore the importance of ending enslavement in the United States. Although so-called African Americans were not able to participate in the electoral process, Frederick Douglass was also a firm believer that the moral secession should be followed by political action, arguing the complete abolition of slavery needed to rely on political forces within the Union, and the activities of the abolishing of slavery therefore should be within the Constitution. As a result, Douglass worked first with the Liberty and Free Soil parties. Later, he turned his efforts to the Republican Party by writing editorials that would persuade its members to think about the emancipation of slavery. Okay. So that's on the part that says moral secession and political action. Now I'm going to go to the third part of so-called abolitionist philosophy, which is resistance through physical action. For some abolitionists, moral secession and political action were not enough. For those who desired immediate emancipation, resistance through physical action was the most effective form of abolition. Harriet Tubman was one of the greatest examples of resistance through physical action. After securing her own freedom, Tubman traveled throughout southern states and estimated 19 times between 1851 and 1860. For enslaved so-called African Americans, rebellion was considered for some the only means of emancipation. Men such as Gabriel Professor and Nat Turner planned insurrections in the attempt to find freedom. While Professor's rebellion was unsuccessful, it caused Southern slaveholders to create new laws to keep so-called African Americans enslaved. Turner's rebellion, on the other hand, reached some levels of success before being slaveholders to create new laws to keep so-called African Americans enslaved. Turner's rebellion, on the other hand, reached some levels of success before being the rebellion ended, more than 50 whites were killed. White abolitionists such as John Brown planned the Harper's Ferry raid in Virginia. Although Brown was not successful, he was hung. His legacy as an abolitionist would fight for the rights of so-called African Americans made him revered in so-called African American communities. Yet, historians James Horton argues that although these insurrections were often halted, it instilled great fear in the Southern slaveholders. According to Horton, the John Brown raid was a critical moment which signaled the inevitability of war or hostility between the two sections over the institution of slavery. So I don't know why they had to say all that. To break it down, the third phase, which is obvious the phase that most white devils are not willing to do, which is resistance through physical action. So there were three philosophical cores to the abolitionists. Now, this explains why Frederick Douglass remained an abolitionist, but he would not join the American colonization cause. Matter of fact, he rallied against the American colonization. He spoke against the American colonization. And I've said it before, and I've shared it with you guys before about Frederick Douglass's 1894 speech titled "The Folly of Colonization," where he exposes the manipulative scheme, as he called it, a scheme. And he was not the only one. Now, I told you guys last week I was going to play some segments of the folly of colonization. And while I explain while I play excerpts from a past podcast reading of the folly of colonization, I also want to share not just Frederick Douglass's call against the scheme of colonization to Africa. I also want to read, as I said before, an article titled "The Attitude of the Free Negroes Towards African Colonization." I want to read that as well. So what I'm going to do right now to conclude my program, or continue my program, as I stated before, I want to play some of Frederick Douglass's speech, "The Folly of Colonization," that he wrote in 1894, to continue to show that the abolitionist movement, within the abolitionist movement, you had many people that hid their agendas. Not everybody in the abolitionist movement was totally against slavery necessary. What they were against was so-called black people remaining in their land, in their homeland, which is North America, and relocating our people to another country. Matter of fact, let me comment on something. I want to comment on the fact that I got an article right here. Let me play this. Let me show this article. I wish I could show this to you. I wish you guys can see this on the screen, but due to the fact that I'm doing a show on the radio, I can't show you. I'm going to change that real soon. Real soon, I will be able to do these things. Okay, now I have right now, and I'm going to explain this in front of me, and I wish I could show. I wish you guys can visually see this, but I'm going. That'll be changing real soon. I will be able to show things. All right. Now, most people think that you got a lot of people who are educated on black history, and they know about the fact that they were trying to send black people in the 1800s to Africa. And you got a lot of Pan-Africanist people who are for that. That agenda has not changed. They're still trying to encourage indigenous people who don't know that they're indigenous, to try to encourage them to go live in Africa. You got Africans who are supporting this. Matter of fact, they have an agenda that's supposed to be coming out next year where they're going to be promoting this back to Africa scheme, and they're going to be doing it by giving people free visas to go live in Africa. Bullshit, okay? But I want you to know that before they came up with this back to Africa scheme, they were trying to send our people to, when they were taking over California, the whole takeover California, they were talking about reserving California for our indigenous ancestors, allowing California to be our homeland. They were also talking about sending our people to Wisconsin, reserving land for indigenous black people in Wisconsin. They were also talking about sending our people to Ontario and to Canada, to Texas. Texas, the white boys wasn't giving up any land, though. They were talking about sending indigenous black people to Central America, to Haiti, to Trinidad. These were other options other than Liberia and Sierra Leone. Most people think that they were talking about, they were setting up Liberia for free people of color to live there. Well, no, they have in the beginning they have complications with Liberia, even though they had their sites set on Liberia. So they had Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, Plan D. You feel me? Sierra Leone was also a location where they had sent a lot of so-called black Americans. Now, mind you, people, don't get me twisted. Anybody who were actually African and were brought over here as a slave, I hope through the American Colonization Society, I hope they made it back home. My problem is that they were not shooting at the people who were Africans. They weren't looking for Africans, so to speak. They were looking to transition Black Americans, indigenous Aboriginal Americans, copper-colored people from their homeland to Liberia people. This was their plan. This is what they wanted. And, excuse me, and as I was saying also, the people that I mentioned, Robert Delaney, Alexander Cromwell, also Edward Wilmot Blyton, they were just the leaders of the cause. There was a whole lot of porch monkey Negroes out there who were promoting this idea, promoting this lie, promoting this manipulation to the people. Okay, so but let me read some of this. Okay, this is some of the I got this is right here. This article right here that I'm going to read right quick before I play anything. This is an article. This article right here is called "Immigration and Colonization: The Debate Among the debate among so-called African Americans from 1780 to 1860." Okay, and I got something I want to read right quick. This is a letter, okay, between two black people. These are black people in 1817. One black man named James 14. Another one is called, his name is Paul Cuffey. James Fortin. And Paul Cuffey. Dated January 25th, 1817. Okay? And it reads like this. I must mention to you that the whole continent seems to be agitated concerning colonizing the people of color. Let me read it again. This is the beginning of the paragraph. He says, I must now mention to you that the whole continent seems to be agitated concerning colonizing the people of color. Indeed, the people of color here was very much frightened. At first, they were afraid that all the free people would be compelled to go, particularly the southern states. We had a large meeting of males at Reverend R. Allen's church the other evening. 3,000 attended there, and was not one soul that was in favor of going to Africa. They think that the slaveholders want to get rid of them so as to make their property more secure. However, it appears to me that the Father of all mercies in this interesting subject, for it appeared that they all think that something must and ought to be done, but do not know where nor how to begin. They will be made straight and clear. We, however, have agreed to remain silent as the people here, both white and color, are decided against the measure. My opinion is that they will never become a people until they come out from among the white people. But as the majority is decidedly against me, I am determined to remain silent, except as to my opinion, which I freely give when asked. Basically, James Fortin was a house Negro. James Fortin was a house Negro. He was a Negro that was hiding amongst the people of color who wanted so-called black Americans to go live in Liberia. But because the majority of so-called black folks were against the idea, he said, I'm going to keep silent. Like I said, we got a whole bunch of house Negroes living amongst us, people. The disease is not as much as white devils as it is as porch monkey house Negroes living amongst us, people. And we're so caught up with chasing money. We're so caught up with wanting technologies. We're so caught up with wanting to have financial independence that we don't give a damn about the porch monkeys, about the house Negroes, about the white devil eyeballs and ears sitting next to us. And we need to care about that. We need to realize we cannot have Negroes we can't trust living amongst us, socializing with us. And we must know who they are. You must know who your enemy is. So, I'm gonna read another one. Now that was in 1817. That was a letter between two so-called black businessmen, American black businessmen, James Fortin, who sent a letter to Paul Cuffey in January the 25th, 1817, talking about how he noticed that most black folks are not for the colonization thing. Okay, I got more. Okay, I got more I want to read to you. Okay, but before I read more to you, let me continue this session where I told you I was going to play and comment at the same time on Brother Frederick Douglass. You might be saying, you're jumping around. No, this all is about the colonization thing. This is all about comprehending the agents of Pan-Africanism. Because these guys who are promoting the so-called Pan-African consciousness, they want our people to go live in Africa. Yet they're sitting over here. They over here living, talking in ideology. The same thing they were doing back in the 1800s, people. They're doing, the agenda has not changed. The agenda has not changed. So let me play this right quick, and we shall return. How could Frederick Douglass speak for African people? If these people were an African people, how could he speak for them and talk about not sending them back home? How could Frederick Douglass talk about keeping a people at home if this is not their home, if their home was in Africa? Just in the 1800s. Come on now, people, wake up. Why wouldn't he just say, well, those Africans who want to go back to Africa, let them go. But those who've been born and raised here, who don't see Africa as their home, leave them alone. But what about the great-grandparents and grandparents who were African, who have toiled on the plantation, who were in their 80s and 60s and 90s? Why didn't he talk about sending them back who wanted to go? Let me go on to the next paragraph. I'm going to go on to the second paragraph right here and continue in this speech, okay? So I'm going on to the second paragraph. It says, the bad thing about it is that it has, of late, owing to the persecution, begun to be advocated by colored men of acknowledged ability and learning. And every little while, some white statesman become its advocate. Those gentlemen will doubtless have their own opinion of me. I certainly have my opinion of them. My opinion is that if they are sensible, they are insincere. And if they are insincere, they are not sensible. They know, or they ought to know, that it would take more money than the cost of a late war to transport even 1/2 of the colored people of the United States to Africa. Now, let me stop right there. Again, this is verification. Frederick Douglass uses the term colored people. He's not calling us African in any shape or form. He uses the term colored people. Now, also, look what he says in this second paragraph. He says, again, let me reiterate this. The bad thing about it is that it has, of late, owing to persecution, begun to advocate by colored men of acknowledged ability and learning. And every little while, some white statesman become its advocate. He's basically talking about house Negroes. House Negroes. These were sellout indigenous black men who were selling us out. He said that have begun to advocate by colored men of acknowledged ability and learning. These were educated brothers who obviously got their education from the Europeans, who are obviously indigenous and native peoples of North America, who decided to sell out their soul, sell out their people for money and wealth and leisure. And they were advocating this same idea to send indigenous poor black people to Africa. There you go, people. That was an excerpt. That was an excerpt from a podcast I did over a year ago titled The Back to Africa Scheme. But that's a reading from Frederick Douglass's 1894 Folly of Colonization that I read to you. And I read a part that exposed the fact that Frederick Douglass noticed that these white devils from the American Colonization Society were sending out their agents They're agents, educated black people to convince indigenous Aborigines to go to live in Africa. And one of those agents, and one of those famous agents that I like to talk about, is Martin Delaney. Okay, and I got his stuff right here. Like I said, he was a sellout, porch monkey, white man, boot licking Negro. Okay, let me read a little bit of his letter. Okay, this is a letter by Martin Delaney that was written in 1852. Okay, but to return to immigration, where shall we go? We must not leave this continent. Just check it out. This is him. We must not leave this continent. America is our destination and our home. The advantages to the colored people of the United States to be derived from immigration to Central, South America and West Indies are incomparable greater than that of any other parts of the world as present. The population of Central and South America consists of 15,240,000, adding to the 10 millions of Mexico. 25,240,000 of which vast populations, but 1/7 are white and the pure European race. Allowing a deduction of 1/7 of this population for the European race that may chance to be those, allowing the deduction of 1/7 of this population for the European race that may chance to be in those countries, and we have in South and Central America alone the vast colored population of 13,177,000, and including Mexico, a colored population on the glorious continent of 21,640,000. This vast number of people are brethren, because they are precisely the same people as ourselves and share the same fate with us, as the case of numbers of them have proven, who have been advantageously thrown among us, stand ready and willing to take us by the hand, nay, are anxiously waiting and earnestly importing us to come, that they may make common cause with us, and we all share the same fate. There is nothing under heaven in our way. The people stand with open arms ready to receive us. The climate, the soil, the production, the vast rivers and beautiful sea coasts, the scenery of the landscape, and the beauty of the starry heavens above. You listen to what he's saying? The song of the birds, the voice of the people say, "Come," and God our Father bird bids us go. Will we go? We go. Go we must, and go we will, as there is no alternative to remain here in North America and be crushed to the earth in vasages and degradation. We never will. Talk not about religious biases. We have but one reply to make. We had rather be a heathen. So basically, he's saying we should go live in Africa. That's what this fool is saying. We should go live in Africa. He said we ain't got no choice but to go. The voice of the people say come, and he says, and God our Father says, bid us go. Will we go? We must. He said we go. He said go we must, and go we will go. He said, as there is no alternative to remain here in North America. You hear? This fool was about leaving. This is Robert Delaney making this statement. And if you listen to his numbers, I'm like, I don't know where he got all these numbers of all these. I mean, we know there are millions of people, but back in 1852, the question is, where was he getting these numbers from? Where was he getting these numbers? And look at these numbers that he was quoting. The numbers of people in Mexico. He says the vast colored population of 13,170,000, and including Mexico. A colored population of this glorious continent of 21,640,000. I don't know where he get his numbers from, okay? But he's quoting a lot of numbers, and he's saying that the black people in Mexico, he's saying that all the so-called black folks in America and South America, we all need to go. We need to leave. This is what this devil was saying. Okay? Let me go on down to another one, okay? Let me see. Let me read another letter. Okay. As I stated, there were many people. There were more people that was against it than there were for it. There were hella people that was for it. And most of the people that was for removing our people to Africa were white folks. And their porch monkey house Negroes. You feel me? A lot of those Negroes that were actually urging indigenous people to leave America and go live in Liberia, a lot of those so-called people who was doing the urging, they weren't planning on going to live there. Some of them did. Most of them did not go nowhere. So let me see. Let me read another one. Now, before I read another one, let me play another excerpt. I'll play another excerpt of Brother Frederick Douglass's Folly of Colonization, his speech that was written in 1894. So check this out, and I shall return. In the third paragraph, the last statement and idea, the last sentiment idea makes colonization very fascinating to the dreamer. Okay? As you heard him, he said again, this is Frederick Douglass, okay? He says, this last sentiment idea makes colonization very fascinating to the dreamer of both colors. But there is really no foundation for it. Fourth paragraph. They tell us that we owe something to our native land. This sounds well, but when the facts is brought to the view, which should never be forgotten, that a man can only save one native land, and that is the land in which he is born. The bottom falls entirely out of this sentimental argument. Let me comment on that. Look what Brother Frederick Douglass says. Evidence again. Listen to what he says. Let me read that again. He said, this last sentimental idea makes colonization very fascinating to the dreamer of both races. In other words, to the white man and the house and his porch monkey house Negro. In other words, he's saying this sounds good to the porch monkey, because the porch monkey know he's gonna always be at the feet of the white man. Master, our house on fire. So he always know he got a place with the white man. So he says this is a fascinating dream of both colors. But he says there is really no foundation for it. He says no foundation. Listen to what the brother says. He says there is no, zilch, zero, no foundation for it. How could Frederick Douglass say there is no foundation just based on being born in North America? How could he say that? He said no foundation. 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 There you go. You heard it. He said there's no foundation for colonizing indigenous black Americans from their homeland to Africa. So what's up with these Negroes today still preaching that ancient old shit? Huh? What's wrong with people? What's wrong with these Negroes? I don't understand. I mean, even people, man, I'm not talking about some of the ones that you guys know. I'm talking about some of the old school so-called educated people. What is up? I mean, what I don't understand is this. If they want to speak directly to those who are African who are here in America, why don't they specifically speak to them? Why did they just blanket us all because of our melanated complexion under the same blanket and call us all African? I'm gonna tell you why. Because they're agents of a system. They're agents of an ideology. They're agents of propaganda. What propaganda? The same propaganda that organization called the American Colonization Society. That same propaganda that the abolitionist movement was pushing. Basically, to relocate so-called black people from their homeland. Huh? That agenda is still there. It has not changed. They know it. That's why they're still preaching it. Let me read another excerpt. I told y'all, matter of fact, let me read this right here. I wanted to read this before. I don't want to read this before I'm already past my time, but I'm going to read this. This is, like I told you, this right here article is titled, The Attitude of the Free Negroes Towards African Colonization. Now, this was published in 1916 But the writings that are within this this article, well, it's actually a volume. It's in the source that this comes out of is called the Journal of Negro History, Volume 1. Okay, published in 1916. Mind you, the article itself was written in 1817. Okay, so let me read this. And this is titled "The Attitude of the Free Negroes Towards African Colonization." I'm gonna read at the very beginning. In the midst of the perplexities of arising from various plans for the solution of the race problem 100 years ago, the colonization movement became all things to all men. Some contended that it was a philanthropic enterprise. Others considered it a scheme for getting rid of the free people of color because of the seeming menace they were to slavery. It was doubtless a combination of several ideas. Let me stop right there. Did you hear what I just read? I'm going to continue reading this article, but did you hear what I just read so far? When it came down to the abolitionist movement, when it came down to those who put together the organization called the American Colonization Society, there were two things going on here. You had those who believed that they were being honest. They were helping relocating people and sending them back home. But then you had those who said, no, the others considered it a scheme for getting rid of the free people of color because of the seeming menace they were to slavery. Remember, not everybody were enslaved. There were thousands of so-called black people who were free people. They were not free because they were African. They were free because they were indigenous Aborigines. They were indigenous Indians because they knew who they were. And the white man could not lock them up or enslave them in places where slavery didn't exist, number one, and as well as where it did exist at, in some cases, they couldn't bound them to slavery because to be a slave, your mother had to be a slave. And if your mother was not a slave, they couldn't enslave you. This is the reason why you had so many different slave laws in different states. And all the slave laws did not concur. Some did agree. Some were basically modeled after one another. Some slave laws were independent of one another because they were not as harsh or they was not as stringent. You feel me? And there were some places where there were no slavery, and in these places slavery was not allowed. And so they had a problem with the fact that there were thousands of people who they considered black who were free, regardless of the fact that these free people were Indian. They didn't want to call our people Indian. They want to call our people Negroes. They want to call our people American Negroes or African Americans. But our people did not consider themselves African. So let me finish reading this, okay? Some contended that it was a philanthropic enterprise. Others considered it a scheme for getting rid of the free people of color of the seemingly menace they were to slavery. It was doubtless a combination of several ideas. Furthermore, the meaning of colonization varied on one hand according to the use of the slave-holding class hoped to make it, and on the other hand according to the intensity of the attacks directed against it by the abolitionists and the free people of color because of its acquiescent attitude of colonizationists towards the persecution of free blacks in the North and the South. Almost as soon as the Negroes had a chance to express themselves, they offered urgent protest against the policy of removing them to a foreign land. Before the American Colonization Society had scarcely organized, the free people of color of Richmond, Virginia, thought it advisable to assemble under the sanction of authority in 1817 to make public expression of their sentiments respecting their movement. In other words, they wanted a voice. They wanted a voice in what was being done to them. Okay? To make a public expression of their sentiment for respecting this movement, William Brawler and Lenty Craw were the leading spirits of the meeting. They agreed with the society that it was not only proper, but would ultimately tend to benefit and aid a great portion of their suffering fellow creatures to be colonized. But they preferred being settled in the remotest corners of the land of their nativity. As president and board managers of the society have been pleased to leave it to the entire discretion of Congress to provide a suitable place for carrying out this plan, they passed a resolution to submit to the wisdom of that body whether it would not be an act of charity to grant them a small portion of their territory. You hear this? Of their territory, either on the Missouri River or any place that might seem to them most conducive to the public good of their future welfare, subject, however, to such rules and regulations as the government of the United States might think proper. Many Negroes, however, immigrated from this state during later years. Subsequent accounts indicates, too, that the increasing interest in colonization among colored people of the Commonwealth extended even in North Carolina. Farther north, we observe more frequent and frank expressions of the attitude of the colored people towards this enterprise. When the people of Richmond, Virginia, registered their mild protest against it, about 3,000 free blacks of Philadelphia took higher ground because their ancestors, not of their own accord, were the first successful cultivators of the wilds of America. Because their ancestors, not of their own accord, were the first successful cultivators of the wilds of America. They felt themselves entitled to participate in the blessings of its luxuriant soil, which their blood and sweat had moistened. They viewed the deep abhorrence, the unmerited stigma attempted to cast upon the reputation of the free people of color, that they are a dangerous and useless part of the community. In the state of disenfranchisement in which they lived, in the hour of danger, they ceased to remember their wrongs and rallied around the standard of their country. They were determined never to separate themselves from the slave population of this country, as they were the brethren by the ties of consanguinity, of suffering, of wrong. They therefore appointed a committee of 11 persons to open correspondence with Joseph Hopkins, member of Congress from that city, to inform of the sentiment of the meeting issued and addressed to the humane and benevolent inhabitants of Philadelphia. Okay, and this is what they wrote to Congress. The address was as follows: relieved from the miseries of slavery, many of us, by your aid, possessing benefits which industry and integrity in this prosperous country assures to all its inhabitants, enjoying the rich blessings of religion, by opportunities of worshiping the only true God under the light of Christianity, each of us according to this understanding, and having afforded us and our children the means of education and improvement, we have no wish to separate our present homes for any purpose whatever. Content with our present situation and condition, we are desirous of increasing the prosperity by honest efforts and by the use of the opportunities for their improvement which the Constitution and laws allow. We therefore, a portion of those who are the object of this plan, and among those who benefits with them of others of color, it is intended to promote with the humble and grateful acknowledgement to those who have devised it, renounce and disclaim every connection with it, and respectfully and firmly declare our determination not to participate in any part of it. Nor do we view the colonization of those who may become emancipated by its operation among our Southern brethren as capable to produce their happiness. Unprepared by education and a knowledge of the principles of our blessed religion for their new situation, those who will thus become colonized will thus be surrendered by every suffering which can affect the members of the human family. Wow. I can go further, but let me stop right there. Hey, what really caught my attention in this is this part right here. I want to read this part one more time. Look, Let me read this part again. Farther north, we observe more frequently the frank expression of the attitude of the colored people towards this enterprise. When the people of Richmond, Virginia registered their mild protest against it, about 3,000 free blacks of Philadelphia took higher ground. Because their ancestors, not of their own accord, were the first successful cultivators of the wilds of America. Did you hear that? They saying, look, our people were here first. Our people cultivated this land first. Our people were the original cultivators of America. Basically claiming their indigenous heritage, claiming their birthright to this land. That's exactly what that statement says right there. And this, as I said, this was written in 1817, published in 1916, and it's titled "The Attitude of the Free Negroes Towards African Colonization." Okay, people, I'm down for time, but I want to play one more clip of Frederick Douglass's Folly of Colonization, and before I close out this podcast, let me play this right quick, and we shall continue. Then he goes in the fourth paragraph and he says, "They tell us that we owe something to our native land. This sounds well. In other words, it sounds good. I guess it sounds good. But when in fact, when it's brought to view, which should never be forgotten, that a man can only save one native land, and that's the land in which he's born in." And he says the bottom falls entirely out of this sentiment argument. Why did he say it falls out? Because when it comes down to it, he knew, Brother Fred knew, that the people in North America in 1894, in 1890, in 1880, their family, their cousins, their uncles, their grandparents were indigenous to North America. How can you look somewhere that you have no relatives at? How can you look to someplace and call someplace home that you have no connection to and no relatives? You don't know a cousin over there. You don't know a cousin over there. You don't know an auntie in Nigeria. You don't know a cousin in Ghana. You don't have an uncle in Tanzania. You don't have a grandmama or a great-grandmama or a great-great-grandmama in none of the countries in Africa. Frederick Douglass knew this even at that time. And that's why he says the whole bottom falls out of the argument. And that's why he says the whole bottom falls out of the argument. And that's why he says the whole bottom falls out of the argument. There you go, people. That was another excerpt from me reading. And you heard that. Frederick Douglass said the whole bottom fall out of it. In other words, you ain't got a foot to stand on trying to say that we are African. Man, let me read an excerpt again. And this is from an article. You can go pull this article up. These are a number of different letters in the 1800s. People who disagreed, indigenous Aborigines, people who they called the free people of color, who wrote to their congressional leaders, who wrote to their church leaders, who wrote this letter I'm going to read right here. This is a letter that was written in 1833 by Maria Stewart. She is addressing the African Masonic Hall in Boston, basically talking to them, the Mason Negroes, them Prince Hall niggas, them Boule motherfuckers. That's who she talking to. Let me read this. This was written in 1833. Okay, February 27th, 1833, by Maria Stewart. I am informed that the agent of the Colonization Society has recently formed an association of young men for the purpose of influencing those of us to go to Liberia who may feel disposed. The colonizationists are blind to their own interest. For should the nations of the earth make war with America, they would find their forces much weakened by our absence. Or should we remain here, can our brave soldiers and fellow citizens, as they were termed in the time of calamity, condensed to defend the rights of the whites, and again deprive of their own? are sent to Liberia in return. Or if the colonizationists are real friends to Africa, let them expand the money which they collect in erecting a college to educate her injured sons in this land of gospel light and liberty. For it would be most thankful to receive on our part and conceive us of the truth of their profession and save time, expense, and anxiety. Let them place before us notable objects worthy of pursuit and see if we prove ourselves to those unambitious Negroes they term us. But me think their hearts are so frozen towards us. They had rather their money should be sunk in the ocean than to administer it to our relief. And I fear if they dared like Pharaoh to king of Egypt, they would order every male child among us to be drowned. But the Most High God is still able to subdue the lofty pride of the white Americans, and as he was the heart of the ancient rebels. So basically, this sister was like, she sounded like she was hella upset. I'm trying to read her stuff, and she sounded like she was a bit upset at what was going on. I want to read it again. Let me see, because the first part of her letter is very, very legible. I am informed that the agents, she called them the agents of the Colonization Society, has recently formed an association of young men for the purpose of influencing those of us to go to Liberia who may feel disposed. The colonizationists are blind to their own interest. For should the nation of the earth make war with America, they would find their forces much weakened by our absence. Or should we remain here, can our brave soldiers and fellow citizens, as they were termed in time of calamity, condescend to defend the rights of whites and be again deprived of their own, or sent to Liberia in return? In other words, our people, indigenous black Americans, fought in the wars. When you need us, we fought by your side. Without us, America would be weak. They say without our soldiers, without our indigenous, Aboriginal, American Indian men, the military will be weak. You feel me? And he said, so what? You want to use our soldiers and then send them to Liberia after you use our people for your purpose? That's what she's saying. Let me continue. Or if the colonizationists are real friends to Africa, let them expand the money which they collect in enacting a college to educate her injured sons in this land of gospel, light, and liberty. For it would be most thankful received on our part and convince us of the truth of their profession and save time, expense, and anxiety. In other words, instead of spending all your money and time trying to convince our people to go over there, why don't you send money and educate the Africans in Africa? Why don't you educate those people over there? And matter of fact, send money over there and build a college over there. And you know what? Do it in our name. Do it on our part. And she says, thankfully received on our parts and this will convince us of the truth of their profession and save expense and anxiety. She says, let me continue. Let them place before us notable objects worthy of pursuit and see if we will prove ourselves to be those unambitious Negroes they term us. But me think their hearts are so frozen towards us, they had rather their money should be sunk in the ocean than to administer it to our relief. And I fear they dared, like Pharaoh, king of Egypt, they would order every male child among us to be drowned. In other words, they rather send our people over there in Africa or kill our people rather than keep us and let us stay over here and then just help those people over there in Africa. So she think there's something behind what they're doing. And it was. The whole point of what they were doing was they were role reversing, identity thieving, culture vultures. Because now you done sent our people over there living in Africa as under the guise, under the false identity, under the culture thieving identity of an African, and they're originally indigenous to America. You've already pulled them and assimilated them, and now you got them dressing and talking and walking like you. Now you want to send them over there and reculturalize them again into another culture that is not theirs. And that's what I'm telling you, people. These people are culture vultures. Doesn't matter if it's a African conscious brother. Doesn't matter if it's a white man or a white woman. They are culture vultures. They're all about changing our identity. They're all about changing our thought process. They're always concerned about what's coming out our mouth and what we're doing. They're culture vultures. Raw and uncut. You're gonna get that right here on the Black Village. So I'm pressed for time. You know, I'm a terrible. I've always been terrible at reading, you know, out loud. But, you know, I got a podcast, I got a show, and I want to share with people, so I do what I can as much as I can. You feel me? And matter of fact, you know, it's hard for me to get off the air when I got information I want to share. But I also had some excerpts of some people that was for colonizing us in parts of our own country. Like I told you. You had people back then who, you know, they didn't want to leave America, but they were willing to go live and relocate us in Canada. Basically take all indigenous, and even those who consider themselves Black Americans, take all the indigenous Negroes, take all the so-called Black American Negroes, and put them in one area. And they were considered in California. This was during the 1800s when they were colonizing, expanding into California and killing the indigenous population and relocating the indigenous population in California. They were considering Wisconsin. They were considering Ontario and, you know, Ontario, Canada. Ontario and Canada. Two places. Separate. I know Ontario is a part of Canada, but they had two places. They had Ontario and they had a spot in Canada as well. They were also considering Central America, Haiti, Trinidad, and they were considering Liberia and Sierra Leone as far as placing our people, you know. And so this was something they were talking about doing before 1865 of the so-called written Emancipation Proclamation. And then it continued afterwards as well, because they were concerned about what was going to happen once all these people from the South are freed from slavery. You feel me? They were free the whole time. They just didn't know it anyway. They could have been left and walked off them plantations. But people, I gotta go. So I will be back. I have some information I also want to share about one of the first so-called Black American newspapers. There was a lot of so-called firsts. You had the North Star, you had the Mystery, and then you also had what's called Freedom's Journal. There's another one called, this is the one I want to talk about, the Freedom's Journal. As I said, you had a whole lot of people, a lot of so-called educated, so-called Black Americans back in the 1800s, like Samuel Cornish, who was a Presbyterian minister, like John Russwurm. These are the two people who had a newspaper called Freedom's Journal, and I want to talk about them as well. So I might just continue this one more session. I want to end it on a 4, but it's hard to end something when you got so much information you want to share. You feel me? And, you know, and I also had something I want to play, something I found on YouTube that I found quite interesting. I want to play, but I ain't got time to play that because it takes about 7 minutes and I ain't got time. So I got to go, but I definitely will be back next Indigenous Sunday to drop nothing but the raw and uncut, as I always do here on the Black Village. You can always chime in. Don't cost you a dime. Just be your conscious time. You can chime in and join me live every Sunday at 857-232-0155. Again, that is 857-232-0155. And conference code to get to the conference to sit with me live on the air is 947595. Again, that is 947595 to join me here. And I don't get too many people to call in. I do sometimes get people who just call in and just sit in and listen. It's all good. But I enjoy the questions, and I enjoy people raising questions. And, you know, all it does is it pushes me to study and research even more. So that's why I do what I do, because I love to do what I do. You feel me? And I share nothing but the raw and uncut conscious truth. But I will definitely be back next Indigenous Sunday. I might just continue this one to a part 5. I don't know, because I got so much information that I want to share, that I still want to share, and I ain't got too much, I end up talking about the information and not sharing too much information. That's why I have to crunch my time, you people. You feel me, people? But I will definitely be back. And I also want to send out love to all my Indigenous American Aboriginal family and my brothers and sisters out there, those who are on the search and who are waking up, and those who have woken up. One love to all my Indigenous Aboriginal comrades out there, you feel me? Brother Dan Calloway, Attention is one, you feel me? Much love to all my people out there. Brother Hampton, you know who you are, my brother. Young bro warriors, old warriors, one love to all my people. We got to come together, people. We got to learn to network. We got to put aside some of these things and focus on what is most important. You know what that is? Cultural identity. Regaining our cultural identity, regaining our indigenous principles and standards that can bring us together as a unified people. People, your people, letting go all that other crap. Letting go all the assimilated crap that's been assimilated into us, from religion to politics to our own hang-ups and issues, people. But it's going to happen. It's going to take time, but it's going to happen. But in the meanwhile, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. You feel me? So, as always, I got to go. So, as always, I'm going to say what I always say. I love chicken. But before I love chicken, may the great mother bring us together in the wings of her love and her peace. And as I always say, I love chicken. So, love, peace, and chicken grease. I'm outie, people. I got to go.
No matter where you go, in every country we in there. Most of us did not come on slave ships, we've been here. Indian just means amalgamated more. The U.S. tried to wipe us out in 3 Seminole wars. For each Aboriginal, 7 troops died. 90% of Indians were reclassified as Negroes. We fought European foes. Africa's great, but we don't look under our nose. Or now here's the Old Man River, or the Massey Sequel, knock out the Mississippi. We're the Yamasee people, and others here like the Washita, the Chocos in Colombia, Darientos in Panama, the Garifunas and more. We're prisoners of war. Our titles, nationalities, and birthrights ignored. We got a huge missing gap in our past and been divided into race of some type of caste. Everyone else has a language, where's mine? Cause ours is long gone like your grandpa's hairline.
Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal people, Aboriginal